You thought it was love. You thought it was real. You gave your time, your heart, your trust, sometimes even your body, because something in you believed this was a relationship. You held on to the moments, the words, the silences in between, hoping they meant something more. But deep down, if you had been honest from the start, you would have seen it. This was never mutual. You were giving yourself to someone who was never truly giving themselves to you, and we don't talk about this enough. We romanticize the idea of giving without conditions, of loyalty without reciprocity. But what do you call it when someone continually opens themselves up to a person who only halfway shows up? That's not noble. That's not faithfulness. That's self-destruction masked as devotion. And so many are suffering quietly in that kind of arrangement, bleeding emotionally while pretending it's just part of loving deeply. No, that's not what love is. What you were in wasn't a relationship. It was a performance of closeness without the backbone of commitment. You shared yourself with someone who was always halfway out the door, who only gave what they wanted, when they wanted, and on their terms. And yet you kept showing up with your full self, hoping that maybe, just maybe, your consistency would melt their distance. But they were never yours fully, and they never planned to be. This is the danger of false intimacy. It feels like connection, but it lacks foundation. It mimics covenant, but it is not bound by truth or accountability. It lets you build hopes on sand while convincing you it's stone. So when it ends, and it will end, you don't just grieve the person, you grieve the future you imagined, the meaning you assigned, the time you lost, and worst of all, the version of yourself that thought this was enough. You see, a relationship, a real one, is not just about emotional intensity or physical proximity. It's about mutual commitment. And commitment cannot exist without clarity. But so many stay in situations where everything is unclear. I don't know what we are. They say they care, but they disappear when I need them most. Sometimes they act like they love me, but they won't claim me publicly. That's not a relationship. That's confusion with a heartbeat. You should never have to guess where you stand in someone's life. If someone wants you, they make it known. If someone values you, they protect your heart, not play games with it. If someone loves you, they will step into responsibility, not run from it when it gets inconvenient. But the person you were holding on to never gave you that. They gave you breadcrumbs. They gave you half answers and mixed signals. They gave you just enough to keep your hope alive, but never enough to give your heart rest. And that's the pain. You kept waiting for a fullness that was never coming. You made excuses for their silence. You overanalyzed their texts. You internalized their distance as your unworthiness. But the truth is, their inability to commit had nothing to do with your value. It had everything to do with their character. Let me say this plainly. You cannot build covenant with someone who is committed only to convenience. You cannot bind your soul to someone who has never shown up with theirs. And I know you wanted it to work. I know you saw potential. But potential is not a promise. Chemistry is not compatibility. And history is not a reason to stay when there is no growth. So yes, leaving someone who was never yours fully is one of the most disorienting pains you can go through. Because it feels like rejection, even though it's actually redirection. It feels like abandonment, even though you were never truly claimed. You don't just walk away from a person, you walk away from the illusion. And that illusion had become your home. But hear me, it was a false home, built on the emotional equivalent of broken planks and foggy mirrors. You deserve more than that. But until you believe that not just intellectually, but in your bones, you'll keep running back to people who make you earn their bare minimum. You'll call it love when it's really just emotional survival. You'll call it connection when it's really just trauma reenactment. And the cost will be your peace, your identity, and your purpose. This is where truth sets in. This is where clarity becomes mercy. You were never fully loved in that relationship because you were never fully seen, respected, or received. And if someone cannot receive you with both hands, then they do not deserve to hold any part of you. You cannot keep handing sacred parts of your soul to someone who only shows up when it benefits them. That is not what you were created for. You were not made for halfway love. You were not made for almosts. You were not made for emotional guessing games that wear out your heart. Leaving is hard, leaving hurts. But sometimes leaving is the only way to stop betraying yourself. Because the most dangerous betrayal is not what they did to you, it's what you kept doing to yourself by staying. So many people are walking around calling their pain love. They say, but I love them, I can't leave, I feel so deeply, I miss them all the time, and they mistake that ache, that obsession, that hunger for love. But let me say something that needs to be said clearly and without apology. Emotional dependency is not love. Longing is not proof of connection. Just because you can't stop thinking about someone doesn't mean they were right for you. It may just mean you've grown attached to what was unhealthy, unpredictable, or unavailable. We live in a world where trauma is dressed up as romance, where inconsistency is interpreted as mystery, where avoidance is seen as power and emotional starvation is sold as passion. And people are suffering silently under the illusion that this chaos is love. But that isn't love, it's addiction. When someone gives you just enough to keep you craving, but never enough to satisfy your soul, that's not intimacy, that's manipulation, and it breeds emotional dependency. What is emotional dependency? It's when your sense of worth, stability, and identity becomes entangled with how another person responds to you. It's when your peace rises or falls based on whether they text you back. It's when you spend your days replaying conversations, reading between lines, trying to decode silences and facial expressions like your life depends on it. It's when you keep tolerating neglect, disrespect, or ambiguity because you're more afraid of losing them than losing yourself. But here's the tragedy. The more emotionally dependent you become, the more you confuse anxiety for affection. You think the butterflies mean something. You think the heartbreak means depth. You think the obsession means love. But let me tell you the truth. Real love doesn't make you anxious all the time. Real love brings peace. It brings clarity. It doesn't leave you wondering where you stand. It doesn't vanish when things get difficult or when you need vulnerability. Love shows up not just when it's convenient, but when it's costly. And that person you were holding on to, they never gave you that. They gave you crumbs and you called it a feast. They gave you tension and you called it chemistry. They gave you attention only when they felt like it and you called it intimacy. But deep down you were starving. You were hoping that one day they'd wake up and finally choose you fully. You kept waiting for the breakthrough that never came. You ignored the red flags because your need to be chosen outweighed your need to be respected. And this is where the truth cuts deep, because emotional dependency doesn't start with them. It starts with us. It starts with a womb that taught us we had to chase love, that we had to earn it, that we weren't good enough unless someone desired us. Somewhere along the line, you learned to associate inconsistency with value, as if the more you had to fight for someone, the more valuable their love must be. But that's a lie. Love is not proven by how much you suffer. Love is proven by how much you grow, how much it lifts you toward healing, toward security, toward peace. Do you want to know how you can tell if someone loves you? It's not just in what they say, it's in what they do consistently. It's in how safe you feel emotionally. It's in how free you are to be honest. It's in how they treat you when they have the chance to walk away and choose to stay. But the person who only comes around when it benefits them, who disappears when you need them most, who makes you feel like you're always too much or never enough, that person does not love you. They may enjoy your attention. They may like the way you make them feel. But that is not the same as love. You must understand the enemy of your soul would love nothing more than to keep you tied to people who exhaust you emotionally. Because as long as you're drained, confused, and desperate, you won't walk in your purpose. You won't have the clarity to see what you were actually made for. And you won't have the courage to say no to less than what God intends for you. The truth is, your heart is sacred. Your presence is not common. Your emotions are not a playground for someone else's indecision. And the more you mature, the more you'll learn to differentiate between someone who truly loves you and someone who only loves the way you love them. There's a difference. One is partnership. The other is parasitic. You are not here to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You are not here to fix someone who refuses to be honest with themselves. You are not responsible for their inability to love, but you are responsible for how long you allow it to continue. You are responsible for the lies you keep telling yourself to justify staying. You are responsible for your healing, and that healing begins the moment you stop calling emotional dependency love. Yes, it will hurt to let go, but it hurts more to keep clinging to someone who was never holding you to begin with. That's not loyalty, that's bondage. And love is never bondage. Love is not supposed to shrink you. It is not supposed to confuse you. It is not supposed to silence you. Love, real love, brings light, not shadow, rest, not exhaustion, truth, not illusion, and you deserve to live in the light. There's a kind of pain that most people never talk about, the grief that comes from losing someone who was never really yours. You don't even know how to mourn it. Because what exactly did you lose? A person, a future, a fantasy, a version of them you constructed in your mind just to survive the confusion they left behind. It wasn't a relationship in the full sense. It was fragments, pieces, moments stitched together with hope. You held on to every word they said that hinted at a future. You reread every message, dissected every look, filled in every silence with meaning. Because if you didn't, you would have to face the truth that what you were clinging to might have only existed in your imagination. You see, this is the cruelty of almost relationships, of pseudo-love, of emotional ambiguity. They give you just enough to spark belief, but never enough to build anything real. You become emotionally entangled in a dream, in the idea of who they could be, not who they actually were. You're not in love with the real person. You're in love with the potential, with the hope, with the picture you painted in your head to make the pain feel worth it. And then when it ends, when the calls stop, the texts fade, the silence stretches, you're left grieving something intangible. You can't explain it to your friends. You don't even understand it yourself. Because how do you mourn someone who never fully chose you? How do you find closure when there was never any clarity? How do you heal from a loss that doesn't even have a name? But this is what happens when we settle for almosts. When we ignore the inconsistencies, excuse the emotional absence, and pretend that breadcrumbs are a feast, we fall in love with the ghost of someone. And when that ghost disappears, it feels like death. But the truth is, you were dying slowly long before they left, dying to yourself, dying to your voice, dying to your standards. You kept shrinking, compromising, waiting, hoping that your loyalty would earn their love. But love doesn't work like that. Love isn't something you extract from someone through your suffering. It's not something you force through silence, patience, or pain. Love is either given freely or it is not love at all. And the more you have to chase someone just to keep them, the more likely it is that they were never truly walking with you in the first place. And that's the devastation, realizing you gave your heart to someone who never held it with both hands. They touched it. They tested it. Maybe they even admired it, but they never committed to it. They never protected it. They never carried it. And now you're left holding the shattered pieces, wondering why it hurt so much when nothing really happened. But something did happen. You loved someone in silence. You imagined with them. You planned in your heart. You waited for them to see you, choose you, change for you. You showed up fully while they only ever brought half of themselves. That's not nothing. That's not small. That's a deep emotional betrayal, not necessarily of what they did, but of what you kept hoping would become real. And here's the truth that stings. They were never fully with you because they never intended to be. Maybe they enjoyed the attention. Maybe they liked the emotional safety you gave. Maybe they were using you as a placeholder until something else came along. But they never gave you the kind of love that brings peace. They gave you confusion. They gave you silence when you needed words, distance when you needed presence, and games when you needed clarity. And you stayed, not because you were weak, but because you were wounded, because something in you believed that this was the best you could get. That maybe, just maybe, your love would teach them how to love you back. But people don't learn how to love through your suffering. They learn how to use you through your silence. So now, you're grieving someone who was never truly yours, and it feels lonely, confusing, even shameful. But let me tell you something, your grief is valid. Even if they were never fully committed, your heart was. Even if the relationship was undefined, your emotions were very real. You felt it deeply. You carried it quietly. You built dreams in a place that was never meant to be your home. And now it's time to tear those dreams down, not because they were meaningless, but because they were misplaced. You must learn to grieve with truth, to mourn what never was so you can stop waiting for it to become. You cannot heal if you keep holding on to shadows. You cannot move forward if you're still trying to breathe life into a story that was never written in ink. It's time to release the ghost, to face the fact that you were loving someone who never fully showed up. And as painful as that is, it's also your freedom, because now you know what you never want again. Now you see what silence really costs. Now you understand that you were not the problem, but you did participate in your own pain by staying too long at a table where love was never being served. So grieve, cry, let the illusion fall apart, and then walk away. Not because you're bitter, but because you're finally honest enough to stop calling an almost a forever. You deserve real love, the kind that stays, that speaks, that builds. And that kind of love will never come from someone who only ever gave you part of themselves. There comes a moment, a sobering, painful, soul-awakening moment when you realize the truth isn't going to change. The person you were holding out hope for, the one you kept praying would finally see your worth, finally step up, finally show love the way you deserved, they're not going to. And the moment that truth sinks in, a shift happens, the denial dies, the fantasy ends, and something else begins. Not ease, not instant healing, but the very first steps toward real freedom. See, healing doesn't begin with comfort. Healing begins with truth, and the truth isn't always gentle. Sometimes it tears through your heart like a storm, because the truth doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care how long you waited or how badly you wanted it to work. It simply stands there and says, this is what it is. You weren't chosen. You weren't prioritized. You weren't seen in the way you needed to be. And that truth hurts. It burns. But it also wakes you up. Because until you see the truth for what it is, you will keep returning to something that never had the capacity to hold you. You will keep offering your loyalty to someone who was never ready to receive it. And you will keep betraying your own soul in the name of hope. But hope without truth is just another way to stay stuck. You see, the human heart can get used to confusion. It can adjust to low standards. It can normalize emotional chaos so deeply that peace feels unfamiliar and stability feels boring. That's how powerful our longing is. We will twist ourselves into emotional contortions just to keep a connection alive, even if that connection is slowly killing us. And then when the silence comes, when the distance grows, when the person pulls away for the last time, we panic, we grieve, we feel abandoned. But the truth is, what we're really feeling is the weight of our own awakening, because now we have to face it. We were never loved in the way we thought we were. We were never seen in the way we tried to show up, and we were never going to be fulfilled in a place that kept us empty. But here's where the shift begins. That same truth that exposes the pain also opens the door to your freedom. It invites you to stop fighting for a version of love that doesn't exist. It invites you to reclaim the parts of yourself you gave away trying to earn someone's affection. It teaches you with fire and tears that you don't have to beg for what's real. That love, when it's true, will never leave you guessing. That peace is not found in clinging, but in clarity. And clarity doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it comes through silence. Sometimes through abandonment. Sometimes through the cold realization that you were never in their future plans, no matter how much you made space for them in yours. But whatever way it arrives, clarity is a gift. It may come wrapped in pain, but it is still a gift, because you cannot heal from a lie you're still living in. And the lie many live in is this: if I wait long enough, they'll come around. If I love hard enough, they'll change. If I sacrifice more, they'll finally see me. But that isn't love. That's captivity, and truth is the key that breaks you free. You are not meant to spend your life waiting to be loved the right way. You are not called to be a side character in someone else's emotional drama. You are not designed to chase, to beg, to shrink. You were made to love and be loved fully, freely, honestly. And if someone cannot meet you there, it is not your job to drag them into maturity. Let me say it plainly, you leaving is not the loss. You staying in a false hope is. The pain you feel in walking away is real, but it's not punishment. It's the detox from deception. It's your soul recalibrating back to truth. It's the beginning of restoration. Yes, you may miss them. Yes, you may replay the moments in your mind, wondering what could have been. But at some point, you have to stop asking why they didn't choose you and start asking why you kept choosing them after they showed you they never would. That question is where your power begins. That's where you learn that your worth is not something someone else has the authority to confirm or deny. It was never their approval that gave you value, and it's not their silence that defines your identity. So let the truth do its work. Let it strip away every illusion. Let it burn through every lie you used to stay. Let it break your heart wide open, not to destroy you, but to build you back on solid ground. Because on the other side of that pain is something far more valuable than their presence. It's your wholeness. It's your clarity. It's your freedom. And when you are finally free, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, you will stop trying to make people love you. You will stop tolerating half-hearted affection. You will stop lowering your standards in the name of empathy. You will look back and thank the pain, because it was the very thing that rescued you from a love that was never real and brought you into a truth that never leaves.